Welcome to another episode of The Swift Half with Snowdon, with me, Christopher Snowdon. Every 2 weeks we have this little half-hour chat with somebody of great interest. I'm very pleased to say that this week it is Eamonn Butler, who is the co-founder and director of the splendid Adam Smith Institute, which has been fighting for free markets since 1977. Eamonn, how's it going?
No, great stuff. Yes, well, we're still fighting for free markets, but I think we've got a long way to go on that front still.
Tell me about it. Yes, I thought we can't start anywhere other than with political current affairs. This isn't really a political show particularly, but I mean, with the Prime Minister resigning, we definitely need to talk about it. It has huge implications, of course, for policy. What do you make of the resignation and of Boris Johnson's tenure overall? Do you think it's been tragedy or farce or something else?
It's been a strange mixture of things, hasn't it? I mean, he's been extremely positive and effective in terms of rolling out the vaccine and actually doing something about COVID. He's been very positive on Ukrainian policy, which I think is extremely important for the security of the whole West. And he's been very effective on other things. But, you know, he's a bit of a showman, and he certainly hasn't delivered the sort of free market agenda that I think conservative voters thought that they were voting for when they elected him.
Yeah, did you think that's what he was going to provide? I mean, he certainly talked a good talk for many years in the pages of the Telegraph and Spectator.
Yes, absolutely, that's right. And when he was editor of the Spectator and writing in the Telegraph, his columns were mostly extremely sound, and then very peculiar. And you know, we had Brexit and all the rest of it, which I think was a positive economic development, which again he pushed through. And so we thought, well, this is fine. Yes, we're going to have a sort of free market thing. But I think that they were, if you like, sidelined by a couple of things. I mean, firstly, the net zero commitment, and you know, and they were locked into the HS2, which is a great waste of money. This high-speed rail. And other things like that. And I think that, and when of course COVID came, huge borrowing to finance the furlough and grants and loans and things. And I think they just lost their place really, and lost the principle as to where they were going.
You did think he had principles, or do you think he was just telling Telegraph readers what they wanted to hear?
Oh, now that's a difficult one. No, I think that his heart was in the right place. I mean, I met him a few times, and he always seemed to be heading in the right direction. Just when he got into office, he did the wrong thing. That's not uncommon. I mean, there were, you know, I remember as far back as Sir Keith Joseph, who was a very, very good in opposition and a very good thinker. But when he became a minister, he was really pretty hopeless. So it does tend to happen. You get absorbed by the system and overwhelmed by the blob, I'm afraid. So I think we have to get rid of the blob. That's the problem.
Well, I was going to say, funny you mentioned the blob, because it's been interesting to see who's been most happy about Boris Johnson leaving. And it is, of course, a lot of, you know, ultra Remainers, Anna Soubry and Michael Heseltine and so on, but also people like John Major, most Labour MPs, I mean, seem to be pretty happy about it, which maybe you should tell the Tories something, I don't know, perhaps not. But it does seem as if, you know, because Boris Johnson was the kind of guy who from time to time would do things that other people wouldn't do. I mean, take the Rwanda policy, right? You know, I mean, very few people would do that, whether you agree with it or not, whether you think it's a gimmick. He doesn't mind winding people up and going against the grain of the civil service and the blob. So do you think his resignation is a victory for the kind of elite, if you, for want of a better word, or the establishment, I suppose is a better word?
Well, I think his great contribution was that he wasn't part of the system. He wasn't part of the blob. He wasn't part of the political grey suits. He was something quite different. And I think people needed that. I mean, it's, you know, it's one of the reasons why they probably voted for Trump, because he was just anti-politics, if you like. And I think Boris was very much the same, although Boris is very much cleverer than Trump. But I think it's the same sort of feeling that, you know, we're fed up with politics. It's not representing people. It's representing itself, and we need somebody that can go in and tell it like it is and be a normal person. And I think Boris fulfilled that role, and I think it's unfortunate really to lose that. And the other thing, as far as the Conservatives are concerned, is that, you know, he won election. He had the touch. And if you remember when he was hospitalized with COVID and Dominic Raab took over for a few weeks, it was awful. It was a disaster because Boris had the touch. Boris sort of knew what to say, and Boris was, you know, he would ride through any problem and so on. But you know, eventually came up with a problem that he couldn't ride through.
So I take it you're not in favour of the idea of Dominic Raab being caretaker prime minister for a couple of months.
I've known Dominic Raab quite a long time, and I always thought he was a great sort of backroom person. And then when he got into politics, less good. And you know, I do wish that some people, on the other side, Peter Mandelson was exactly the same. You know, great fixer. When he became an MP, he was just one among several hundred, and it didn't really count very much. And I think Dominic's a bit like that. I think he's great behind the scenes. He's a great, I suppose, number 2, 3, 4, but not necessarily a leader.
But you don't go along with this idea that Boris should go immediately and somebody temporary be put in for 2 months. I'm not sure where this idea has come from. I mean, it's never happened before, has it?
It's not usual, although I think Cameron left immediately, did he not? And
who took over? I was trying to think about this before. Did he leave immediately and somebody was caretaker? I can't remember who that person was.
Yeah, I can't remember, but I think that's true. And of course, that causes even more chaos. You know, if you had a caretaker who everybody would know, oh, this person's only there for a few weeks and is not going to be able to do anything. At least if Boris stays, then he can stabilize that to a certain extent. I mean, it seems crazy since, you know, he's sort of caused the instability, but nevertheless, I think you need somebody there with a presence who can just keep the ship on the road. And the fact that John Major is one of those saying he should go immediately, you know, convinces me that he should stay on a bit.
Yes, well, yeah, whatever he says, do the opposite. From the Tories' point of view, do you think? I mean, I've heard this a little bit this week from speaking to various people. From the Tories' point of view, do you think they'd be better off losing the next election?
I've never subscribed to this view that you've got to go through really bad times in order to come and rebuild yourself. You never know what's going to happen in an election. You know, you could elect Keir Starmer, and then suddenly you find that there's a coup, and you get all the Corbynistas come out of the woodwork. That's exactly what happened in the London Council with Red Ken and so on. That you elect a moderate, and then suddenly you find them replaced by somebody that's not a moderate, and they do all sorts of real damage. So I think it's good to have an effective opposition, and I'm not sure that we do have an effective opposition at the moment. It should be much higher in the polls than it has been over the last year or so. But at the same time, no, I don't want socialists to get into power, because I think that they are damaging in a very deep way that it takes years to recover from.
And the main economic issue, obviously, at the moment is inflation and the cost of living. I personally find it quite unhelpful that people merge these two terms together, because it seems to me that dealing with the cost of living or helping people cope with the cost of living is rather a different thing than dealing with inflation. And in fact, the helping people deal with the cost of living could lead to more inflation, in fact. But they seem to be discussed together. So rather than just saying the problem these days is high inflation, we say the problem is a cost of living crisis, which, I think the policy responses are somewhat different. Firstly, why do you think we have high inflation?
Oh, well, I think ultimately it's printing too much money. I mean, yes, of course, there are pressures right at the moment, particularly on fuel and on food, and that's partly because of the war and so on. But if one price goes up, then unless there's more money in the system, then another price has to go down. But you've got the Bank of England, which has been propping up the government with extremely low interest rates for 10 years. And it's been printing money like there's no tomorrow. And it's been buying government IOUs. So the government's borrowing has just soared. All of these things contribute to inflation. And you're right, I think inflation is very damaging. It's the one thing that you've got to fix. I mean, the agenda for the next prime minister must be to fix inflation, because inflation is highly damaging. I've lived through 1970s inflation when it did reach 20-something%, and it's very damaging economically, socially, and morally. And economically, all prices are rising, so you can't really see which prices are going up and which are going down, so you make bad choices and bad investments. Businesses can't keep up. I mean, for example, in the 70s, I paid 17% on my student overdraft. I was happy to do that because inflation was 22%. In other words, the bank was paying me to borrow their money. It's just crazy. But that's the kind of craziness you get into. And then on the social front, it's very disruptive. We've seen it now with the wage claims, and unions put in for not just what they've lost in the last year, but what they expected to lose in the next year. So you get ridiculous wage claim, power struggles. It becomes a class war again. Pensioners lose. Pensioners with index-linked pensions, like civil servants, are just fine, but the rest of us lose out. And then there's demands for wage and price controls and taxes on imported steel, and you name it. And morally, inflation just encourages overspending. It encourages borrowing, and it doesn't encourage saving. So it's got to be killed stone dead. Hayek was quite right.
I quite agree. I was in the fish and chip shop yesterday, and it was a little bit like living in the 70s. I think there was a sign up on the counter saying, "Please don't blame us for rising prices. These are, this is not us trying to make more money. This is us trying to keep our head above water." And the price list, which was, professionally made, kind of printed up thing, had just been adjusted with felt tip, and all the prices had gone from, £7 to £8.50. I mean, significant jumps. I know fish has probably been more affected than a lot of things, but it was quite a stark reminder. What then? I think we both agree that the priority has to be to fix it and not allow inflation to be too high, certainly next year. Well, how do we do that? Classic monetarist response?
I'm afraid so, and it's tough. It's like I always say, inflation is a bit like a drug. You take a drug, and you need bigger and bigger doses to get the same hits, and that's where we are at the moment. We've taken bigger and bigger doses, and now we have huge borrowing, huge monetary, or we have had huge monetary expansion. And you've got to rein that in somehow. And banks are very good at handing out the drugs. They're really bad at pulling them back in again. And so, the market's expecting that interest rates will go up, but to something like 3%, but that's still 8% below the rate of inflation. Right. It's still 8% negative. So, where are you? And the EU average inflation is not far behind ours. So we've got a real problem there. I mean, a Europe-wide problem. And I think that we've just got to go through the pain. It's like, when you come off a drug, you've got to go cold turkey, or you take your time on it, but you're going to have a lot of pain. And I think that we have to bear the pain. We've overdone it.
And we would have a recession, you think? I mean, we're probably going to have one anyway, might be. But I mean, the raising interest rates to, what would you suggest? I mean, presumably above the rate of inflation, right?
Well, they've got to be positive. Yeah, they've got to be positive. Yeah. The question for the bank, of course, is how quickly you do it. And if you rein in, actually, the monetary aggregates have been falling pretty fast. They have been reining in, and that's made people think, oh, well, there's going to be a crunch. So what the bank tries to do is to moderate that and ease it over a number of years. But actually, when you look at the figures, the countries that do best in squeezing out inflation and recovering are the ones that do it rapidly. Get the pain over with, and then move on. And that's, it's a hard message, but it's probably what we should do.
Do you think if we'd have done that 6 months ago, then the Tories could be looking at an election in mid-2024 and thinking, well, we were gone through some pain, but things would be manifestly looking better by that point?
Well, if we'd done it before the COVID thing, yeah, probably. But
before COVID,
yeah, oh, absolutely, because we've been inflating for a decade and more, since the financial crash, basically, just printing money, and the government's been borrowing, and the Bank of England's been paying for their borrowing. So that's been unsustainable for a long time, and that's why we have zombie companies that are only kept going by low interest rates. We've had a zombie government that's only kept going by low interest rates. Well, you can't live like that forever, I'm afraid.
Do you think we're actually winning this, what seems to be a fairly simple argument? I mean, I had Julian Jessup on the show a few weeks ago, and he would agree with us on it. And there were a handful of people, even this time last year, really. It was me, you, Liam Halligan, and Kate Andrews, and a few others who were saying, we have printed 450 billion pounds, I think, over the course of 2 years. This is going to have an inflationary effect. This was considered to be a very niche opinion. And now we have inflation running at about 10%, and it's still a niche opinion. You don't see it really mentioned as a cause. I saw Matt Hancock on Newsnight 2 nights ago, and he was saying it's very important that we are straight with people. We need to be honest with people. We need to tell them the truth. We need to tell them we have high inflation, and this is because of the war in Ukraine. And never mentioned anything about monetary policy.
No, absolutely. It's like your chip shop example. The chip shop owner says, don't blame me. I'm facing higher prices from my wholesalers, and then you go to the wholesalers and they say, no, we're facing higher prices from the suppliers. Everybody faces higher prices, and the reason they do that is because there is too much money being basically created by the Bank of England, and it's compounded by the fact, of course, that we're working a bit less. We've got used to, quote, working from home, which means not doing very much and not coming into the office, not being as productive as we were. And we're getting fewer East Europeans to harvest the crops and all of that kind of stuff. So we're actually producing rather less, and we've still been producing more money. So when you've got less goods being produced and more money being swamped around, then prices are going to rise, and that's exactly what's been happening. But I do think that we kind of understand inflation now better than we did back in the 70s, let's say, when world inflation was something like 30%. And I think we sort of understand now that inflation is a monetary phenomenon, and politicians are always going to say, oh, well, don't blame us. It's the war in Iraq. It's rising food prices and fuel and all that kind of stuff. We can't do anything about that. That's just the life. It's not my problem, but it is in fact their problem. I think part of the trouble is that hope springs eternal. I mean, everybody hopes that, we can get through this without there being a recession, but no, as soon as you start the inflation, you're going to have a recession. It's like as soon as you start on the drugs, you're going to come to a bad end.
You say everyone understands this. I'm not sure that's true. I think actually a lot of people kind of learned the lesson and then forgot it. I mean, does the Bank of England understand that? Nothing in its behaviour suggests that it understands that. They have basically one job, or certainly one priority, and they're not really using monetary policy or interest rates to do much about trying to achieve the 2% target. It seems to me they're just hoping that this is in fact Ukraine, or maybe they think it's Brexit or something like that. And once that kind of dies down, things will come back to normal.
Well, as you say, they have one target, but actually they're looking at lots of targets. That's part of the problem, and that they, instead of targeting inflation alone, they've all sorts of other things. They're looking at employment and looking at house prices and, you name it. And that's not actually what they're there for. They're there to ensure the stability of the currency. Once you've got that right, you can get the other things right, but you've got to get that right first. That's why it's a priority for every government, I think, particularly now.
Yeah, because I think one of the reasons for making the bank independent was that they would be able to, if need, in a situation like this, they would be able to put interest rates up to an unpopular level, and the government wouldn't get blamed for it. Yeah,
absolutely right, and they haven't done it. As simple as that. No, I think there's too many sort of establishment people on the Monetary Policy Committee. There's all these sort of bank insiders and not enough outsiders who can take a more long-term and objective view. They're like rabbits in the headlights. So they see all these bad things happening and they think, oh dear, we just have to keep expanding because that's the only way to do it. But that's like taking more and more drugs. That's a hair of the dog treatment. That's not going to do you any good.
Now, you're a prolific author for the IEA as much as anybody else. I've lost count of how many primers and short versions of various things. I've got one here. This is Hayek. I was rereading your democracy one the other day. So you've done, just to list a few, these are all basically primers: classical liberalism, Austrian economics, foundations of a free society, democracy, Hayek, Rand, Friedman, Smith. Should I read Rand, by the way? I don't mean your book. I've read your book, but is it actually worth reading? They always look intimidatingly long, and from what I can tell, not. But I don't know. It seemed like
Yeah.
might have better things to do than read 1,000 pages of Rand.
Oh, I agree entirely. Well, you can read my summary in the book. So
exactly, yeah.
That's about 4 pages. In fact, I wrote the Rand primer deliberately making it shorter than the famous John Galt speech in Atlas Shrugged.
Right.
So, the thing that's supposed to encapsulate her philosophy, I've made shorter than she did. No, I think you're right. I mean, I'll tell you, I didn't exactly fall out with Rand. I got turned off the Rand movement when I was a student because it was very factional. Still is to a certain extent, but it was very factional. And I came back to it just shortly before I wrote that book a few years ago. And I came back to it because she brings so many people into the movement. Young people read Atlas Shrugged, and young people read The Fountainhead, and they're deeply moved by it. And they think these ideas are fantastic, and the idea that you should stick up for yourself, and and that you don't owe a living to anybody else, and all of this kind of stuff is extremely powerful, particularly to young people. And then, as they get older, they might learn, well, it's not quite as easy as that. And there are nuances and so on that we've got to deal with and other problems. But it still brings them into the movement. And that's why she's important. I disagree with her philosophy. I can see that there's a lot of good sense in it. I think her books are pretty bad because I think the characters are two-dimensional. They're either heroes or they're complete villains. They're all very cardboard. I mean, the Fountainhead is a bit better, and the plot of Atlas Shrugged is really slightly preposterous. That the idea that all manufacturers get together and then they decide that they're going to set up their own community and keep outside the government. It's rather silly, to be honest. But nevertheless, that's the reason why she's important, is because of the effect that she has on so many people, bringing them into free market, free society ideas.
And of all the economists you've written about so far, I guess there's more to come. I don't know. Is Adam Smith your favourite? I mean, that's maybe a silly question to ask the director of the Adam Smith Institute.
Well, I think Hayek is my favourite. Actually, I've sort of grown up as a Hayeki, and I knew Hayek, and I thought he was a great man and a very wise man. I think that Friedman, who I also wrote about, was the sharpest man I think I've ever met. He would always have an answer. He would always he'd have a smile on his face, and he'd love to debate and argue, and he was very rapid at dealing with points and so on, and in a very effective way. So he was sharp. Hayek, I suppose I would say, was more wise, that he would take his time and think about things, but he would come up with an answer, and you'd look at it and you'd think, yeah, he's right, isn't he? Yeah, that's it. Let's move on. Next business. He's got it right. So that's the great thing about Hayek. And of course, Hayek is a great polymath. I mean, he wrote on science, which is very interesting, and he wrote on social philosophy and politics, and he wrote on economics as well. So he, real polymath, and I think undoubtedly one of the greatest minds of the 20th century.
Yeah, and you've got a new one, yes, another book with the IEA coming out in a few weeks' time, I believe, which is a subject I've written a bit about as well in my time, which is inequality. Can you give us a sneak preview of what you're saying about inequality?
I think it's mostly that book cribbed from Chris Snowdon, actually, but I'm looking at this. It's really an assumption of equality. Everybody assumes that equality is a good thing, and everybody assumes it's a kind of moral thing. And I'm just going through the arguments and saying, well, there is actually another case here, that, why are some people extremely rich? Well, there are reasons for that, and they're not necessarily bad reasons. And I think that we've got to realize that inequality is not something which is good or bad. It is simply the outcome of other things. That we do things and we end up unequal. I mean, you can have two people who start life absolutely identically, and they make different decisions. And one might spend their money and the other might save it and invest it and so on. And at the end of their lives, they end up extremely unequal. Well, there's nothing wrong in that. And also, I mean, it's a point which you've made many times, that we look at the inequality statistics, and actually most poor people are young people and most rich people are old people. I'm a lot better off now than I was when I was a student. And the reason is because I've spent a lifetime building up my human capital and writing books and becoming, useful to people, which, I didn't have those skills when I was young. So it's not surprising that through their lives, people tend to earn more and more and more. And as they earn more, they can save more and invest more. And then they get wealthier. So they get higher income, but they get even higher wealth. And if you just take a snapshot of society and you say, oh, there's a few people that are really wealthy and quite a lot of people who are really poor, but they may be the same individuals at different parts of their life. Yeah. They may be, the young people are poor and the old people are rich. And that's actually probably most of it.
Yeah, indeed, it is a big part of it. I often say when I'm doing talks about inequality is that it's an indicator, right? But the question is, what's it indicating? It's quite possible that in fact, it's certain that there are countries where you have high levels of inequality, and the levels of inequality would be lower if it weren't for corruption or monopoly power or all sorts of cronyism and bad things. On the other hand, there are countries where inequality has increased. I think the UK is a pretty good example of this one in the 1980s and 1990s, where it was a result of things like getting rich people to move back in the country because they'd all legged it in the 1970s, didn't want to live here. They're having more businesses and wealth creators and so on. So in itself, it doesn't tell you anything, but it's quite interesting, possibly as an indicator to see what's going wrong or right in a society.
Absolutely. I mean, look at housing and migration. We have roughly about 250,000 migrants coming to the UK every year. And migrants tend to be poor. In fact, some of them are really, really, really poor.
Or occasionally very rich.
One or two are, but most of them.
It's either one or the other very often, is what I mean.
Not really well off. And we're not building enough houses to accommodate people. So the people who have got houses, who tend to be wealthier, they're getting even richer. So house prices are going up. They're getting richer. And at the same time, we're getting more poor people coming in. So it's natural that you would get increasing inequality. But don't look at the inequality. Look at what's happening underneath, and it can be an indicator to say, look at your policies. Your policies are rubbish. You are doing some really bad things, like in housing, that's making rich people even richer. For no gain, and you are impeding younger people and preventing them getting on the housing ladder. So the thing about inequality is it's okay if you can work yourself out of inequality. If you're in a country where you're unequal because you happen to be the wrong gender, or you happen to be the wrong tribe, or you happen to be the wrong family, well, there's nothing much you can do about it. If you're in a country like the UK, well, you can do something about it. If financial wealth and income is what you're after, you can devote your life to doing that. If being an artist or something is what you want to do, you can do that as well. So as long as there's choice about these things, then I don't think we should get worked up about inequality statistics.
Yeah, and that brings us on to the subject of social mobility. Perhaps you could do a primer on that at some point in the future, but we haven't got time to discuss it now because our half hour is up. Eamonn, it's always a great pleasure to speak to you. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you at home for watching. We'll be back in another couple of weeks with another episode. Thank you particularly if you are an IEA donor. If you want to become an IEO donor, or you want to give us even more money, go to iea.org.uk/donate, or you can go to the patreon.com/IEA London if you want to support our digital work in particular. Have a great weekend. Take care, and I'll see you next week, or 2 weeks' time, I should say. Goodbye.
Well, if you enjoyed that conversation, why not watch one of these other videos? And while you're here, remember to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss out on a single IEA broadcast.